So for today's session, we have Major General Bucky. You can both take a seat, actually, of DoD's Defense Innovation Unit. So Bucky is DIU's Military Deputy and Space Portfolio Director. He joined the organization in 2015, initially serving as the West Coast Military Lead. He's helped establish DIU's operating locations in Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, and a lot more, and currently leading the space portfolio focused on developing on-demand access to space, persistent satellite capabilities, broadband space data transfer, so much more. So really excited for today's conversation that Joe will be leading. So thank you.
Bucky, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be back on the Stanford campus, so it's awesome.
Long time supporter. Ernestine read a few things, but there's so much more in your bio, Bucky, so I'm going to force you to be immodest. I mean, every time I've seen you, you have about 4 or 5 jobs, all very senior, just a lot. Tell us about all the things you're doing. I mean, you're running the California Air National Guard, you're doing DIU, you seem to be in charge of a whole lot. Maybe just give us a flavor of all the things that you have on your plate.
Right. So actually, advice to all of you is I actually pride myself on focusing, except my career doesn't reflect that. So right now, exactly. So right now, through no intelligent design, I am the military deputy at DIU. I'm also the space portfolio director at DIU. In my reserve capacity, I'm the commander for the California Air National Guard, which, and what does that mean for you? There's 5 wings all throughout California, 3 of them which have 24/7, 365 missions, including air defense. So if there were missiles or bombers or something coming in trying to encroach the United States offshore, they're the ones that intercept them and escort them out, and lots of other capabilities. But I'm hoping, with my current gig, that sometime in the next year I'll settle into one job with one duty title, and then and wrap it up. But it's fun. But there's so many interesting things going on right now in the world. So and then any of you, just if you're like us, working 40 hours a week is not nearly rewarding enough. So we have to be super contributors to what we do. But I will say that the one way that I maintain my sanity is I'm a super delegator. So people who work for me generally like that because they run around with all the authority that I have, and it's worked out well. I've been promoted twice since doing that, and surrounding myself with really good teammates. So which is key to success.
Well-deserved promotions, and I know personally from knowing a lot of your subordinates that are really inspired and they love working for you. So Bucky, we will get narrowed down to space in a bit, but kind of give us a little background on the Defense Innovation Unit, maybe a little story, because it is up and running now with a huge budget. You were there from the very beginning of Plank Holder. I remember seeing you help build this organization. Maybe just what is DIU for those of us who here are interested and don't know about it, and give us a little sense of the mission.
Sure. So the mission of DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, is to accelerate the adoption of commercial technology for national security and defense at speed and scale. That's the newest part that Doug Beck, my boss, incorporated when he rejoined the organization in 2023 from Apple Computer. It was founded really in the spring of 2015. Then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter actually came to Stanford. It was April, and announced that he was going to do this, set up an organization in Silicon Valley explicitly to try to get the commercial sector to do more meaningful work to help us with national security and defense. And that's, believe it or not, like we're only another quarter away from that being our 10th year of doing that. But just to let you know how difficult that was, the initiative actually started almost 2 years prior, but there was so much resistance to it, and on all sides. But today, I think we've awarded over those 10 years nearly $2 billion worth of contracts to commercial companies that are all household names. We have quite a few startups that became household names, and unicorns, if you're used to the Silicon Valley language, which means that they've got billion-dollar valuations. We don't own any stock in any of these companies. We're just proud parents of the companies are like our kids, so it's a lot of fun. And a few of those companies actually came out of Stanford, so which is to be expected. So that's part of our success.
Shameless plug for Hacking for Defense, which Bucky has been an enormous supporter. We had our first year, we had a company called Capella Space, the synthetic aperture radar company, who I think is up there close to the unicorn ranks now.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah, incredible. So yeah, I mean, DIU is amazing thanks to its great leadership, and it's great to see it's finally getting close to the resources that its mission deserves, and it was a long time coming. But Bucky, maybe we kind of build this as a bit of a space session, so I might kind of narrow us down a bit from everything which you're responsible for to maybe your one of your hats being running the space portfolio. But maybe just kind of a broad, set the scene for space, maybe the state of play for space competition, maybe relative to our competitors like China, but maybe just kind of an overview where you see space tech right now.
Yeah, I'll put a little caveat on the first part. So in the military, I'm a combat rescue pilot. So I flew airplanes and helped to do search and rescue, personnel recovery operations in support of all the military operations we've done around the globe. So I'm not a space guy from the military standpoint. I'm just like you. I'm a big time space user, and so I think that's really important. If you do take the Hacking for Defense course or anything related to it, the lean methodology is know who your customer base is. So so why would I ever go and talk to a space guy and say, what does a warfighter need, when I can go to the warfighter and say, what do you need? How can space better support you? So that's part of the way that DIU works. But actually, when when the DIU was founded, I was the wing commander on the other side of Moffett Field. So the Moffett Field is right in Mountain View, with the big dirigible hangars. That the 129th Rescue Wing that's there is the largest military presence inside the Bay Area today. And but I had a friend who reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to go join the staff at Cybercom, the cyber command that's out in Fort Meade." And their problem was they kept putting out solicitations for commercial technology, and none of the cool commercial companies would apply. They'd only get more applications from the traditional defense primes that don't know anything about computers or cyber, but that they would be putting in for this stuff, and so that began this journey to do things. When we formed DIU, I didn't want to do cyber. I wanted to do space. I graduated from San Jose State University and in physics and astronomy, and I was very fortunate to get a job through the SETI Institute out at NASA Ames Research Center, where I spent a lot of time in the 1990s, actually. And that came to abrupt halt when 9/11 happened, because all my research money went away, and I went back on active duty. And so when DIU was created, and I had an opportunity to get, we were organizing portfolios that fast-track commercial technology. I said, I'll do space. So and it's worked out pretty well since then. So, but for space, the interesting thing is there's things that you can do from space, like remote sensing the planet. There's things you can do through space, like move things around, have maneuverability, which is something that none of the satellites that the government has today can do, so they're all vulnerable to attack. And then other things you can do with space, probably the most important thing that you're all familiar with is communications. And probably before many of you graduate from Stanford, you'll be able to do a lot more with your smartphone in your pocket because of how we're using advanced architectures in space today. So those are really the big ones. We call, my top 3 priorities at DIU are responsive space, persistent sensing, and resilient communications, which if you want to operate anywhere on the globe, you need all 3 of those things. They're foundational to everything else that we do. And there's some other things in there too, like alternative PNT, precision navigation and timing. So if the GPS, it's a very weak signal that you receive on your phone and in your car to navigate, but if that's denied to you for any reason, that has tremendous impact on the economy. So how can we get PNT signals from alternative commercial sources? And then there's some advanced stuff we were talking beforehand about power. Everything in space today is solar powered. And solar power is fine, but it's not good for continuous power if you need to do things that require gobs of power, right? So going after alternative power sources and things like that.
Okay, I know some of this may be classified, but what technology are you most excited about and that has space related? What do you really think is going to be real game-changing tech?
Actually not classified at all, because the most interesting space technologies are all commercial. So one, reusable launch vehicles is a big one. So when I was going to college, if you wanted to put something in the space shuttle, anybody want to take a guess at how much it costs per kilogram to fly a payload in the space shuttle? About $80,000 per kilogram. Okay, and that cost has come down significantly. So for a Falcon 9, it's a few $1,000s per kilogram. For Starship, which is going to fly tomorrow afternoon from Texas on its 6th test flight, they're hoping to get the price below $1,000 per kilogram. So that's a pretty significant drop in a relatively short period of time, certainly within your lifetimes. Each time the price of access to space drops, guess what happens? New business plans begin to open. You can close a business plan because the cost of operating is reduced. So for every significant drop, I would say there's probably a disproportionate number of businesses that become realistic, and that's really important. So Starlink, which you're maybe all familiar with, there's 6,000 satellites that orbit the Earth right now that make up the Starlink network. And the idea that you could launch and maintain a 6,000 satellite constellation would just totally blow the minds of anybody who did space even like 10 years ago, right? But and that's just one example. But other technologies are obviously, just like the Capella case, is commercial remote sensing. And each one of the companies focuses on a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So in the case of Capella, they do synthetic aperture radar, so they're kind of in that millimeter wave. But you can do, Planet just started launching a new set of satellites that are doing hyperspectral imaging, infrared. There's another company called Hawkeye 360 that does radio frequency. And so what happens is, accumulatively, all these companies are collecting across that spectrum. And when you get that, and this is all licensed and available in the global marketplace. So you can take all that information, and with artificial intelligence and computer vision and all these other algorithmic approaches, you can analyze that data and get new insights that were not available before. And even more important is, by the end of this decade, we're expecting that there'll probably be 10 to the 4 more commercial sensors than government sensors orbiting the Earth. So who wouldn't want to take advantage of all that? So there's tremendous potential with what's happening commercially, and all of this is at a fraction of the cost of what it would typically cost the government to do the same thing. So as a taxpayer, even if you don't have any interest in space, as a taxpayer, you'd be interested in making sure that the government's not spending money unnecessarily to do things that they can do with commercial capabilities. And so we like to say you need a balanced portfolio of capabilities that include the commercial and as well as the bespoke government special purpose type of capabilities that we use for national security and defense.
So, Bucky, what are, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges to making advances in national security, defense-related space tech? What is it? Regulatory? Is it what?
Yeah, it's all politics actually. So, forget space for a second. So DIU, we're pretty important, and we work directly for the Secretary of Defense. The annual budget for research, development, test, and evaluation within the Department of Defense is $184 billion. And last year was the first year that we got $1 billion budget at DIU, which sounds like a lot of money until you start writing checks to commercial companies. And so we actually accounted for 0.7% of the total RDT&E budget for the entire department. So that we're making good strides, but it's kind of sad to say that the commercial only reflects less than 1% of that money. And that's not even acquisition. That's just proving that the technology can actually solve a national security problem. In the government, there's the law, which is black and white, right? There's no in between. There's no gray area with the law. It's really compulsory. Then there's policy, and Joe's been involved in the policy side. So there's no such thing as perfect policy. So if you write policy, there's always going to be exceptions to policy. So you have to figure out that landscape. And then there's culture, and culture is not law or policy, but it's a real thing. And anybody who spends an inordinate amount of time, like a whole career, in any place, including the government, they have a very strong cultural fixation on what they think is the right way to pursue problem solving. So we have to. Law is easy because if the law doesn't work, you just go work with legislators and they change the law, and that's actually part of the National Defense Authorization Act. And DIU is now codified in law, which is something that Secretary Carter did not do 10 years ago, but it's now codified in law that we're an agency of the Department of Defense. Policy, we actually have more policy coming out of the department today that talks about how we integrate commercial technology into solving the needs for national security and defense. But the culture piece is tough, and we'll see. I mean, it's regardless of what your political affiliation is, for sure the culture is going to be tackled, open field tackle of the cultural parts of bureaucracy over the next few months, and so and a lot of that is probably well deserved and needs to happen. So, but that's it. I mean, that's really it. Finding companies, it's actually very easy to find companies that can do worthwhile things. Funding them, we're getting the money, but I think it's just really that one thing. Culture is probably the biggest hurdle for an organization. We're created to disrupt things. If you know what disruption means, that means a lot of people are unhappy when you disrupt their universe. But we're pleasant people, so we try to make it as genteel as possible.
But you talked about disruption. This is dating myself, but my earliest childhood memories was, the early, the Apollo days, walking on the moon. I mean, it was, I remember it was like, I don't know if I actually remember, but I think I was like 3. And I remember my mother sitting me in front of the television. But now, we would have never dreamed back then that there would be commercial players in space like that. It was always, rah, rah, America. It was U.S. competing against the Soviet Union. Anyone ever heard of the Soviet Union? That's before your time, but that was a big thing when I was a little kid. It was a thing. But it was very much a state-to-state, NASA. But talk about some of the impact of, this disruption of commercial companies. And let's talk about SpaceX, talk about Elon Musk. What is that? What's the impact that that's having on space?
Well, let me do one thing. Just historically, if you think back to when humanity first took to the sea, it was actually commerce that really revolutionized that, and the Dutch were very much a big part of that. The entire global power structure changed, right? For more than a century, really, based on that technological evolution. And I think it's really important that we that we keep that in context because this is just another domain. Space is just another commons, if you will. Nobody owns it, but it's ripe for exploitation, and whoever fails to take advantage of what space offers today will probably have diminished impact on in global affairs going well into the future. So that's kind of my preamble. But today, yeah, the commercial companies, they wouldn't be doing it without private investment, and so the private investors always need to see what is the return, right? What's the real value that they can get back in. And the interesting thing is, if Werner von Braun, who basically invented most of the way that we went to the moon in the 1960s, if he popped out of a time machine and looked around and saw expendable rockets in the year 2024 that cost $2 billion to launch, that's the story of the space launch system that NASA's got for the moon right now. Yeah. He'd probably lose his mind because there's like there's really very little, if any, improvement in the technology over a span of half a century. If Henry Ford came back in the same time machine and saw electric vehicles from Tesla, he says, "Oh, I thought about that, but they just couldn't do it back then." But that would be like that's different. So, and really the failure to evolve is directly related to the culture, because even the National Academy of Sciences in 2010, 2011 timeframe had written a scathing paper saying that it was frivolous or futile to go pursue reusable spacecraft, launch vehicles, from a commercial standpoint, which is the same year that SpaceX really got going with launching their first Falcon 1. So that just reinforces the culture. But so these companies, it's not just that they can prove that they can do it; they have to show what's the path to revenue, and the path of revenue becomes clear when you start to see a lot of the interesting science and things that came out of the a half a century of NASA work with the International Space Station. I don't know how many of you, any biology majors in here? Anybody what's biology experience? Okay, you can actually grow a human retina in microgravity, and you have to transporting it back to the surface of the Earth is the tough part because you can't pull too many G's. You can't the acceleration forces, but we're able to grow human tissue in microgravity environment. We're able to grow new semiconductor crystals that perform much better than ones that we can grow under the influence of the environment here on the Earth's surface. The quality of vacuum on the surface of the moon is 10 times better than the quality of vacuum that we can make in any semiconductor foundry on planet Earth, and it's free, right? So there now, those are some examples, but the difficult thing is how do you lower the cost of all the other things in order to exploit those opportunities? And like I mentioned earlier, the cost of launch is one factor, but the availability of power, the ability to manufacture things at scale, these are all starting to happen. And that's where, if you look at where the vast amount of money is going, is going at that, which is pretty phenomenal. The other thing which is interesting is that the number one commercial market, well, number one and number two. Number one commercial use of space is telecommunications. Number two is actually in the remote sensing, it's for agriculture. So most of the farmers around the planet, like me and Joe as tactical operators, they're super users of space information, and how they plant and maximize the yield of their crops is tracked on a day-to-day basis from space, using that whole spectrum of sensors that are available today commercially. If the government was doing that, the government makes it really impossible to release that information, because most of that goes into our intelligence community, which means that even I might not even get it. So depending on the circumstances. So the democratization of all this space capability is really amazing, not just for us in defense, but for commercial companies, for agriculture, for the benefit of allies and partners, and especially the developing world, where they can see on a day-to-day basis on how this information can make a difference in meeting their challenges.
Buck, you mentioned the importance of private capital. Could you talk about the kind of the state of venture and space tech, and where's the money going, and what do you see the future looking like?
Yeah, so this is probably a bad analogy, but I'll use it nonetheless. So you have to look at like investors the same way you would look at like car salesmen or real estate agents, right? There's really good ones and there's like really bad ones. And so the reputation of who you're dealing with is really important. And it's also important to, and what are their motivations, right? So some may be just, their motivation may be to just own your idea or own all the intellectual property that you're creating as a innovative new company. Others want, like in the real estate example, most real estate agents want to flip this house. They want to make instant money. And that's good for some areas. You can do that in software. You can develop software very quickly and scale it quickly and make a lot of money, with small manpower, small overhead expenses. But in hard tech, it doesn't happen that way. So for hard tech, you need patient investors who are vested in what's the long-term objective that you're doing, and they're out there. They tend to be the more seasoned people who've already made their billions or of dollars, and they want to be on the cutting edge of some of the newest technological things that are out there. If you're interested in technology, one great example of that right now is who can afford a GPU cluster? Well, most those are like billion-dollar investments by themselves, and usually those are investments made by billionaires, right? So the top billionaires are all doing this and competing to do interesting things with artificial intelligence and advanced compute. The government can't afford to do that, and it shouldn't do it, because what we should be doing is leveraging the work that these companies are doing, and if anything, get that as services, so that so we don't bust the bank for something that's going to be obsolete in 2 years. But I think the investment strategy is really important, and I think it's taken us a while, but we feel like we have a pretty good understanding of it, and it's really important that on the government side that we're sympathetic or empathetic to the fact that these are commercial companies who need to deliver commercial products to the marketplace. The government, we're nice people, but we're a horrible customer, right? So we don't always have money. We tend to rotate out, and so the buying patterns can shift. But commercial companies need to be commercial, and that's why at DIU we try to solve problems with commercial technology first. So we don't go and tell a company, build this for me. We give them problems, and we allow the company to solve the tough problem with their solution, or in combination with another company. So teaming is very important to solve the toughest problems, and so that we can just buy them right out of the commercial marketplace.
So, but I'm often guilty of having a U.S.-centric lens. I look at things, but obviously space, a lot of countries at play here. Maybe your thoughts on, let's look at allies, partners, and competitors. Maybe talk to us about like Australia as an ally, maybe India as a partner, and maybe China as a competitor. How are they playing in this space?
Sure. Well, this is really, if you care about solving the toughest problems, you want to take a very, you want a meritocracy type of approach to solving the problem. And oftentimes the best solutions are not on our domestic borders. So for me in space, two really good examples of this. when we started funding small launch companies, I met Peter Beck from Rocket Lab, which is actually a company from New Zealand. Much later, after we started working with them, they established a U.S. Presence, which is in Long Beach, California. But for the first year or so that we worked with them, they were just a company from New Zealand, and today they're the #1 small launch provider. So that next to SpaceX, they launch more than anybody else every year. And then another company, when we worked with Capella, we also worked with a company in Finland called ISI, and ISI, 2 founders, and they would come to Silicon Valley all the time from Finland because they wanted to find investment money. So we'd meet down in downtown Palo Alto and got to know them, and we started working with them too. They also have a U.S. presence now in Southern California. But we pride ourselves on looking everywhere. Largely based on things that you did, Joe. We're expanding our relationships. We're awarding challenges in India. We've got more contracts in Australia than any other country on the face of the planet right now. I was just in Wales, so there's a small company I really like in the space arena called Space Forge, and they're out in Cardiff. So I went out there to visit them and see what they're up to. And so we are always looking for interesting companies, not just here in the States, but globally. And if we fail to do that, others will take advantage of that, right? I like to think that we've got the best intent for taking care of these companies in mind. So it's better us than our adversaries.
Should we be concerned about China in space, and why?
Yeah, well, I think it's actually very healthy that we're competing with China. So they we want to. In a perfect world, we would compete with China in every sphere except for the national security and defense sphere, right? So they're doing really interesting things in space exploration. Lots of interesting things across lots of other technology areas where we share an interest. So our job is to lower the temperature of global conflict, and you've heard this adage, peace through strength. It's pretty consistently effective, but we want to deter adversaries from going kinetic or trying to solve problems on Earth by with militaries. That's always a losing proposition. You might win in the short term, but in the long term, that's not good. And anybody who's been watching the conflict and where Russia invaded Ukraine is a great example of that. There's a tremendous loss of human life, and there's got to be other ways to resolve issues like that. But I think for China is going to be a great contributor to the global economy, and it's pretty clear for the rest of this century we're going to be competing in different spheres, and it's our job to make sure that we're just not competing in that military sphere.
Yeah. So some big event happened earlier this month, the election. Talk to us about what your anticipated. How's the next administration going to impact kind of space tech, and space employment, and basically the entire enterprise?
So the interesting thing, we don't worry so much because what we do, and from a DIU standpoint, but the military in general, it actually enjoys a lot of bipartisan support. So we were created in this second half of the Obama administration under Secretary Carter. We grew under the Trump the first Trump administration. We continue to grow, and under the Biden administration, and for all things that we're looking at right now, we'll probably continue to grow under the next Trump administration. I think the most important thing is that if we're true to what we do, if the most effective application what DIU does is we reduce the cost of what it takes to do the type of missions that the military would typically do. Here's a great example. So I'm a pilot, so I'm kind of very highly biased to this. But if you have an airplane that's manned with a fighter pilot, and you're able to put 3 or 4 autonomous aircraft off of its wing to do things that we wouldn't normally do with a manned aircraft. Those 3 or 4 things are a fraction of the cost in terms of not just the equipment, but also personnel to go and do a mission that we couldn't do even in the first part of my career. So, or even today in some cases. So using technology effectively is something that we really spend a lot of time on. And you say, well, isn't DARPA doing that? Well, DARPA doesn't innovate. DARPA is really there to invent. And so they work on hard tech solutions, but the output that they create is the technology that gives companies and those who produce products, services, or software the ability to scale and deliver things at mass. So there's different roles and missions, but you need everything. You need a good, solid, science and technology foundation, which I actually think one of the things, we strengthen our ties to the commercial sector. There's other partners like us who are doing the same thing with the academia. The government needs to engage academia more, or at least more effectively. So I'd rather see you, a researcher working on a tough problem like the ones that we're working on, rather than some of the things you hear about in the fraud, waste, and abuse reports, like trying to figure out I won't even give an example, but you all know what I'm talking about. So
Bucky, we're going to turn over some questions. Maybe just give a big, broad question. One last one from me, maybe. Well, maybe for those that may be interested in, our young entrepreneurs who want to get involved in space, maybe some advice on where you see the big opportunities. But maybe more broadly, you can finish with this one. You've obviously had this amazing career of public service. Maybe some advice. Everyone here wants to do a startup. A lot of them. But what's your advice for those who care about public service and looking for opportunities to serve? Maybe short of a 30-plus year career in the uniform.
Well, like I said, I think actually public service. There's lots of ways to return things to the community at large. Whether you're part of a community organization or you do a stint with the government, but any kind of service like that is very rewarding because you meet incredible people, and you actually grow. I mean, I think I've seen a lot. For myself, I've done a lot of interesting things, but personal growth-wise, I'm just watching people solve really tough problems and get good at it is really amazing. And so it's to contribute to that in one shape or form is very rewarding. But I would encourage all of you to think about that in your life plan, and whether you go back and teach, or you're just a mentor to somebody young who's trying to find their course of life. Many of you, just by virtue of the fact that you're here at Stanford, you've done extraordinary things and personal sacrifice and really applied yourselves to get a seat in this room. So, which tells me that you have a lot that you can share, and you just have to find the outlet that's most appropriate for you. I have 2 sons. You have 3, right? So, but I have 2 sons, and I never told them that they had to pursue a career in the military. One of them actually did, one
of my sons works for Bucky.
That's right. And so that's actually really cool. But I think that's really important. It's important that each of you, that should be part of your life journey, to figure out how you're going to contribute back to society, or just help people, or solve some of the tough problems that we face as a nation and as a global community.